Hi, my name is Amit Gathani, and today I'll be talking about design thinking, and not just design thinking, but a specific design thinking methodology that we've used in many enterprises and smaller organizations. A little about me: I'm a director of product management at Publicis Sapient, and I work in a variety of industries and fields, providing design thinking methodology, implementing it, and helping organizations scale their operations so that they can be faster, leaner, more agile, and produce outcomes that they need. So, with that, we'll start on our presentation. What is design thinking? Design thinking was founded at Stanford University in 1991, widely used across the technology sector. It's a modern set of tools, a philosophy, an approach, and a mindset to think about problems and design solutions to satisfy customer needs. It's highly adaptable and applicable to a wide range of problems. One design thinking framework that we'll cover today involves the Stanford Design Thinking Inspired Framework for Product Discovery, which is applicable to all organizations of all sizes. It's based on the principles of lean, design thinking, collective intelligence, and creative problem solving. And essentially, it requires a flow from processes that organizations have to a framework that they can actually implement that helps them ideate and find innovation, discover innovation. It also involves going from responsive exercises to proactive exercises, involving both the business, the processes, the client centricity, the data driven activities, and the technology. And it involves going from collaboration with multiple stakeholders, cross functional stakeholders, to co creation. So you're actually not just collaborating between business, product management, UX, services, and dev, but you're actually co creating with this team. So, why design thinking? Today, many organizations use cross functional teams to collaborate on a regular basis. We need co creation to be more successful in our endeavors, shifting mindset from responsive to proactive, along with responding to customers' pain points. We also need to be proactive to competition and evolving user needs. Some organizations follow a lot of different processes which may or may not be adequate. We need a framework with steps and templates to ensure consistency and desired outcome. That's what this framework for design thinking is about. It's about co-creation, and instead of collaboration. It's about shifting mindset from responsive to proactive, and it's about building a framework that allows you to produce the desired outcome time and time again. So, who should participate in design thinking? Well, the important thing when you're choosing design thinking members is that you bring a diverse perspective. Generally, you'd like to bring the business and the strategy teams because they allow you to have an insight into both internal business matters as well as external market needs and competition. You also want the product management team to help with product objectives and metrics based on the business needs. You want the user experience team and researchers help in creating user empathy by providing user insights. And you want the technology team, which identifies opportunities and latest trends. This is what we call solution co creation. So, how does design thinking work? Essentially, you have three parts of design thinking. The first part is called pre-sprint. Pre-sprint is the preparatory phase before you conduct a sprint. This helps in detailing the business problem, outlining user insights, and defining technology landscape. So it's all about preparing all the information you need to make the right choices and decisions about what you want to solve for in the next phase, which is sprint. So sprint is a six-stage structured and facilitated design innovation cycle with cross-functional teams which deep dives into specific business problem by ideating, prototyping, and validating with users. So we'll talk about that in more detail because that's really the chunk of design thinking. And the final phase is the post sprint. In this phase, the design solution and prototype are detailed out. You validate the design through usability testing sessions and finally presenting to the business stakeholders. So this is where you really create your high fidelity prototype and test it. So let's get into the details of pre-sprint. Pre-sprint is as we mentioned is a preparatory phase before you conduct a sprint. It involves the creating a foundation which is critical to defining the problem before even attempting to solve it. It helps in detailing the business problem, user insights, and technology landscape. It's really split into 4 different activities that you really need to go through. The first activity is identifying the business challenge. This is the first step where product owners are the key stakeholders. They work closely with the business, UX, and technology teams to create initial brief focusing on business problems, target users, and initial research data. So here's where you're identifying the business challenge. You're bringing all the information you have about the business challenges together into a canvas and being able to present that canvas to the team that you're now going to recruit. So now you're going to recruit the team. The composition of the team, or sprinters as we like to call them, is critical. The sprinters should be representative of diverse groups that are required to solve the problem. This third step is setting base camp. So here you're creating and collating data on the user journey, the empathy, flow, and persona reveals the underlying and persona, which reveals the underlying why behind user actions and decisions so that the team can design for real needs. So this is really you creating a user journey map, the experience map, and being able to identify the empathy, the flow, and the processes that and the pain points that the customer goes through in various problem sets. And finally, for the prepare mind and space set phase of the sprint, it's important that people come with an open mind and are in an exploratory mood. So you want them to be open-minded. You want them to communicate and knowledge share before sprint and space identified. You want them to think out of the box. You want them to have open-mindedness and be able to come with a preparatory mindset that they can use to think outside the box on all of these things so you can ideate and find the right problem sets. The next step is sprint. So sprint is a 6-stage structured and facilitated design innovation cycle with cross-functional teams who deep dive into specific business problems by ideating, prototyping, and validating with users. So you can see here, you have the 3 big circles, which is really about diverging, and you have the 3 smaller diamonds, which is about converging. So that's really what design thinking is about. It's about diverging and understanding various different problem sets, right? And then defining one specific problem set that you really want to solve for as a team. So co-creation, co-development, and defining and voting on the one problem set that you think is really important to solve for. So you vote on it, and the one with the highest vote wins. Then you idea storm. So you're coming up with all different ways of ideating on that one particular problem set and coming up with different ways of solving for it. And then you confluence. So in confluence, you're actually converging on one specific problem idea that you want to solve for. And that's the idea that you're going to actually vote for. And the one that wins, that has the highest votes, is the one that you're going to confluence on. And finally is a prototype phase, where you're going to create a low fidelity prototype. And you're going to create various different low fidelity prototypes on the idea that you chose on the earlier phase. And then on the last cycle, you'll validate with the customers on which one you want to go for. And the customer at that point gets to choose. So as we talked about breaking down the sprint, it's really about understanding, defining, idea storming, confluence, prototyping, and validating. And these are all the steps that you would take to diverge and then converge on the idea, define the idea, understand the problem, define the problem, ideate on various different ideas for that problem, confluence on one specific idea as a collective team, and then prototype on various different low fidelity diagrams that you'd create to prototype on that one specific idea that you've selected. And then finally validating that one specific idea amongst your customers or users. Finally, we have the post-sprint exercise. This is really where you're going to try to create a high fidelity wireframe for your product, and then usability test it and present it to stakeholders, business stakeholders, usually leadership at your organization, who are going to validate that you're on the right track and that you've found something that you should be working on. So the high fidelity wireframe should have high level interactions and navigation that can be tested with actual users to validate the design concept. The usability testing then that you then go through should be very low fidelity. It should be very inexpensive. You should really be trying to test with users at the lowest possible cost that you can potentially go through. And you want to be able to fail fast, so that if you're failing, then you can go back into the drawing board and ideate again, define new problems, ideate again, and try to confluence on one specific prototype again. But this is usability testing is really going to help you determine, validate the concept, but also identify high-level glitches that could include the navigation model, key features, or priority tasks. And finally, the final outcome after incorporating the feedback from usability testing sessions is presented to business stakeholders. This is really where you get to present, you get to sell your idea, and talk about all about the framework that you followed through to get to the ideation phase. Remember, process is almost in many cases just as important as the final solution that you come up with, because it's the process that defines how well you were able to get to the final product. So let's make sure we use, well-defined product frameworks like this one, and be successful with that. If you have any questions at this point, please let me know. I am going to propose one question for the team. How can such design thinking frameworks transform your organization? Okay, let me just flow through. Okay, I will go back into my screens and reshare them, so we are all in the same boat here. So we started with the introduction. We got into what is design thinking, which was defined as founded at Stanford University in 1991. It's the intersection of feasibility, desirability, and viability. It's a modern set of tools, a philosophy, an approach, and a mindset to think about problems and design solutions to satisfy customer needs. And it's highly adaptable and applicable to a wide range of problems. Okay, I'll take it out of presenter mode. I think I understand the problem now. I must have put it into presenter mode. Okay, I will send it. I will send it out thereafter. Okay, so the design thinking framework here is going from process to framework. It's from responsive to proactive, and from collaboration to co-creation. Right? So what you're doing is you're going from taking creative problem solving, design thinking, lean and collective intelligence processes, and we're building a framework out of it. And the framework is what we'll talk about in this presentation. And you're also going from responsive on business processes, client centricity, data-driven approaches and technology, to a proactive approach. And finally, you're going from collaboration on for business, PM, UX services, and dev to co-creation amongst all these stakeholders. So why design thinking? Today, many organizations use cross-functional teams to collaborate on a regular basis. We want to do co-creation to be more successful. We also want to shift the mindset from responsive to proactive, along with responding to customer pain points. We also need to be proactive to competition and evolving user needs. And some organizations follow a lot of different processes, which may or may not be adequate. We need a framework with steps and templates to ensure consistency and desired outcome. So who should participate in design thinking? Essentially, you want to ensure that the business and strategy teams are available to identify the internal and external business challenge. You also want the product management team, which helps with product objectives and metrics based on the business needs. And you want the user experience teams, which helps in creating user empathy by providing user insights. The technology team identifies opportunities and latest trends. Let me get that question out of the way. Okay. And now, how does design thinking work? So essentially in this framework, we have three major phases of it, which is pre-sprint, sprint, and post-sprint. Pre-sprint is a preparatory phase before you conduct a sprint. This helps in detailing the business problem, the user insights, and the technology landscape. Sprint is a 6-stage structured and facilitated design innovation cycle with cross-functional teams which deep dives into specific business problem by ideating, prototyping, and validating with users. And then finally, post-sprint is where you're going to validate the high fidelity prototypes that you build and present them back to the business stakeholders. So what is pre-sprint? Pre-sprint is about identifying the business challenge, recruiting the right team for that business challenge, setting the base camp in terms of understanding the empathy flow maps or the user experience maps for each of those problem sets, and preparing mind and space. So making sure everyone is open-minded, thinking out of the box, they're relaxed, they're in an exploratory mood, and they're able to produce what you want. The most important phases of this are the first two, which is identifying the business challenge. You want to be able to, create the canvas, the initial brief canvas of the business problem, understand the target users, the segments that are using it, and the initial research data around it. You want to be able to capture all this information so that you can make the right choices. Secondly, you want to recruit a team that is diverse and brings a diverse perspective to the challenge as well. You don't want everybody from the same part of the organization, because essentially you're going to get the same kind of viewpoints and same kind of ideas. So having diversity really helps. Finally, setting base camp is about drawing out the user journey in that problem set, identifying the empathy maps for the user, the pain points that they're having, what the persona reveals, and why they have those pain points along the way. And finally, we have now the sprint. Sprint is the second phase of this framework, which really involves diverging on understanding the problem set, defining one specific problem set by voting on it, and the one with the highest votes wins. And then ideating on a number of different ideas for solving that problem set. And then confluence, which is emerging or diverging on one specific idea that you want to solve for. And then the prototype, which is really the low fidelity prototyping of this problem set and validating on one specific idea of the problem set. So, all along the way, you've got a lot of voting happening on the confluence, on the divergence steps, on the convergence steps. You have a lot of ideating on the divergence steps. So the circles are where you're diverging and you're ideating and coming up with large, high-end ideas and really, thinking out of the box and opening up. And in the diamonds is where you're converging and you're voting on what you want to go for. You're asking users to validate for you. and they're voting on it, and that's where you come up with the best. By the time you've gone through this exercise in three different steps here, you've gotten an idea that's well prototyped, that is on a good track for success. So it's rigorous, and it involves a lot of different ideas, a lot of different divergent and convergent steps. But by the time you're done, you get to a post sprint where you're now you're at a phase where you're very comfortable and confident that your idea, problem you're solving for, is the right problem. The idea that you've got for it is the right idea, and the low fidelity diagram or prototype you have is the right one. So at this phase, you can now produce a more high fidelity wireframe. You're still not trying to spend a lot of money on it, but you're going to spend enough money to present a high fidelity wireframe, and then usability test it, get users to test it, and understand what the problems are with it, the high level glitches, what the key features and priority tasks are, what the navigation model should look like. And you should get a lot of information from users on this at this point, which is also, again, you want to do this at the lowest cost possible. You want to be able to make this very lean and at the lowest cost possible. And finally, you have the stakeholder presentation, where at this point you're now you're recursing to fix all the things in your high fidelity wireframe based on usability testing. When you get to a point where you can now present it to leadership and be able to actually get their approval for it. And that is really what design thinking is about. It's about the ability to go through all of these phases and be able to produce, through all this rigor, be able to produce a great innovation through the whole approach. Okay, so we've got some questions here. Okay, so we've got questions here. What is the time frame that you are suggesting a sprint happens in? Is this like the 1 week design sprints? Yeah. So generally, the time frame that the that the sprint should happen in is generally sprint zero, right? You would generally do this during sprint zero, which is usually 1 week. You want to spend, an exercise like this, like I'll just flip back to this exercise here. An exercise like this should really be happening in sprint zero, where you're coming up with all of this information. You're doing this over 1 or 2 days, full days of work, and you're spending the entire day doing all of this. And this is where you really come up with your greatest ideas moving forward. So sprint zero is where you would do this, and then the phase before this, which is the gathering of the pre-sprint information, identifying the business challenge, is really going to happen, and recruiting the team. That's really something that should happen way before. And it's usually initiated by the product manager. The product manager really is the person who would be initiating a lot of this user experience, the business challenge, understanding the context in which this problem is occurring. Recruiting the team is something that leadership should kind of get involved in. Someone, even a scrum master, could be involved in recruiting the right team members. The empathy mapping, again, or setting the base camp, we call it, is really something that should happen, again, by the product manager, something they should be doing on a regular basis. Again, it could be fit into sprint zero, since what we're kind of suggesting is that the sprint exercises happen in sprint zero between 1 or 2 days max. You would probably spend about 2 days maximum doing this, so you want to finish that off in 2 days, and spend the other 2 or 3 days doing some of the other exercises around building context, understanding the problem sets, and defining them, right? So with that, I'd like to propose the question here, which is, how can such design thinking frameworks transform your organization? Okay, so I'll let you guys respond. So the question here is, would you suggest this approach for organizations of all sizes, or are there ways that this approach may differ for medium or small companies, startups? Yeah, so I mean, generally, I work for both small companies, startups, medium-sized companies, as well as larger companies, enterprise companies. And currently I consult for a lot of enterprise organizations, Fortune 500s. And one of the things that I constantly, that we're constantly trying to do is design thinking at every phase. We're doing it for smaller companies and we're doing it for larger companies. It's something that applies to any company of any size, primarily because the outcomes that you get out of it are really well refined. Especially when you go through a rigorous approach like this, you really get to a point where you've thought about a lot of different aspects of it, of the problems you want to solve for. You've ideated on them, you've diverged on prototypes and validated them. So you get a lot of great output out of this. And a product manager, once in the ability for a product manager to facilitate this, really adds a lot of value to the product manager as well. But at the same time, it's the output you get out of it, the outcomes that you get out of it, that really are valuable. So I would say any company of any size can do this. I mean, especially I would say the smaller companies are the ones that really have an easier time doing this. It's the larger companies that have so much bureaucracy and there's so many different departments, and getting the team together in the pre-sprint phase is the hardest part, because so many people want to have input into it, from various parts of the organization, that it just never gets done. It's just like everybody wants to say something about it, and you just don't move forward. So the ability to bring lean exercises like these into the framework and get a divergent point of view, even for larger organizations, is really important. But at the same time, it as you can see, because it involves co-creation and more than collaboration, it really pushes people to, like, go beyond their, just providing input, to actually contributing to a final solution. And that's very important as well. We have another question here. Let's see here. Who should conduct design thinking process, the product designer or product manager? Yeah, so the process is really interesting because it really design thinking process is really the methodology that, like, we've went through a methodology here. It's a framework that we used in one of the organizations I've worked at, and it's a process that's usually set defined. It can be defined by anyone in the organization. You know what I mean? It doesn't have to be a product manager. It could be a technologist at any part of the organization that can go out, learn design thinking frameworks and processes, and apply them, right? Generally, the person who should do this, though, is someone who is a strong facilitator, because as you can imagine, as you're going through the processes of a sprint where you're diverging on understanding the problem, defining it, diverging on idea storming and confluencing on it, and then diverging on prototypes and validating it with users, this is a lot of facilitation skills that are necessary to get to the end result. So the person who really should be designing the process, and really should be facilitating it all along the way, are really either the scrum master or the product manager, right? You want one or the other, somebody in between them, really helping out with a lot of this stuff, and facilitating and getting it through the cycle to the end result. So um, process design, really, I wouldn't say a designer should really be involved in it in terms of facilitation. Designers are really important to have their feedback, especially during some of these phases like idea storming and prototyping and even understanding the problem. But it's really someone with a strong facilitation skills that should be helping with the process and moving the process forward. We have another question here. Who would you gather at this stage to perform idea storming? Does it include software engineering in addition to the product team as well? Um, so before you even get to the idea storming phase, let me just flow back to the presentation. So and during the pre-sprint, you have the recruit the team exercise. And this is really where you want to define who's going to be involved throughout the processes of the design thinking framework. And here, what you really want to aim for is a diverse point of view, right? You want people with diverse perspectives, yet you also want people who are engaged and actively wanting to provide input, because you get a lot of people who are just want to sit back and relax, and they don't want to provide input and feedback. So you want the active people who are good in ideas and who are active and engaged. So that would really include people from engineering, product management, user experience, user research, design, as well as the business and the strategy teams, right? You want someone from the strategy teams talking about the customer segments and the user personas that are involved. You want someone from the business team talking about internal business processes that need to be adhered to. You want the technology lead talking about the limitations that potentially are there, the dependencies that would need to be implemented. So you want all these kind of folks, all diverse perspectives, but from different backgrounds, providing input on this particular phase of the design thinking process. And really, it's not just about idea storming. It's really about all these processes. You want them involved in understanding, idea storming, and prototyping. All right. We still have some more time for questions. I'm happy to answer any. We've got some really good questions today. Thank you, everyone, for asking them. Still have some time if someone wants to ask. I will send the presentation out afterwards, and you can definitely review it and let me know. All right, folks. And with that, I will stop sharing and thank everybody. Thank you, everyone, for joining. And if you have any questions, please reach out to me. My email is amitgathani@yahoo.com. Thank you. Bye now.